It's the My Michelle Live podcast.
My Michelle Live.
All right, thank you so much for making us part of your day as we always endeavor to give you the best information, sometimes opposing ideas, sometimes food for thought in this climate where we are ever divided. When we can have some common sense, when we can see the bigger picture, it just makes things not only so much brighter, so much more illuminated, but it also gives us hope. Now, today we are amongst us dealing with a monster. This monster that we're all dealing with. Maybe we'll say a few monsters. And these monsters, you know why they're so very, very scary? Because they're all so very, very invisible. What am I talking about? Well, many of the things that we fear and we hear about on the news are things we really can't see or observe with our own eyes. Why is that a problem? How does that feed into fear and create an atmosphere where we are ever more divided, working off of fear, and have horrific results? We're going to talk about it with my next guest, who I'm so excited. We've not had an interview up to this point before, and I'm surprised. I'm just glad we could do it today. Dr. Patrick Moore. You may know Dr. Moore as a co-founder of Greenpeace. Dr. Moore has been a leader in international environmentalism and in that field for, I would say, more than 40 years. He's the co-founder of Greenpeace, served for 9 years as president of Greenpeace Canada, I think 7 years as director of Greenpeace International. He currently sits on the board of directors for the CO2 Coalition. He's involved in a lot of wonderful organizations, and in my opinion, bringing a little bit of balance to an issue that's very passionate to a lot of us. You may even know his story. This is a big, long intro because he's got so much to him. You may know his story from his book, Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout. And now he has a new book that we're taking on today, Fake, Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. That fits into exactly what we're talking about today. Dr. Patrick Moore, thanks for being with us. It's always fun to interview someone whose resume that you spit out is almost as long as the show, but it is a delight to have you with us today.
I've had a few
as we all have to a degree, and probably should, because that shows to me that we're thinking people. Now, this book is really important, I believe, as we strive to breach that divide that I was talking about. We have fearful catastrophes looming, and we're seeking to make sense of it all. Dr. Moore, when I just read the title of your book, The Light Went On, I went, oh my, he's right. The things we fear the most are invisible. Whether it's radiation, CO2, or even the coronavirus. These are things that we can't see, and they're part of the impetus of writing this book, correct? That makes sense.
I figured that one out too. This is actually the unified theory of scare stories that I have. In physics, there's this pipe dream that someday they'll find an equation that theory probably happening. I made a prize for coming up with the unified theory of scare stories. But I have done, and I don't think this has Therefore, it doesn't even exist. Other things,
Hmm.
and then very remote, like polar. Very few people get a chance. These disasters. So it's a very powerful convergence of interest stories.
Interesting. We just cut out for a second, and there you are.
That the Earth is going to come to an end in 10 years or whatever. The Earth
Mhm.
isn't going to come to an end, but people end up thinking it's true because I don't know why people want to believe the worst when in fact we have a lifestyle now, especially in the Western democracies, that is unparalleled in the history of human civilization. We have learned to look after the environment so much better than we did when I started in Greenpeace 1971. That's like 50 years ago, 49 years ago. So a lot has happened in the intervening time. The air is cleaner, the water is cleaner. We've learned to make pollution control devices for our fossil fuel plants so that all that's really coming out of them is CO2 and water. And the real clincher, though, is that carbon dioxide is actually entirely beneficial both for the environment, in that that's what plants use as food, and for human civilization, because we need food. And the greening of the earth, which has resulted from our CO2 emissions, is the main thing that they have accomplished. They are not making the earth too hot for life. That's what people are saying. Too hot for life would be a doomsday story.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not going to happen. It's actually impossible for that to happen with carbon dioxide. And so the fact that all our children now are being brainwashed into thinking that the world is coming to an end because of fossil fuels has got all these governments saying they're going to end the use of 80% of all energy in human society. That energy, the fossil fuels, is what gives us our longer lives, gives us our freedom to move, and gives us the wealth we have in society today. And the way things are going, all they're going to do is hurt the poorest people in the world with these plans to make energy so much more expensive than it is today. So I think I have a positive message to offer to people, and that is, first, doomsday is never real. And secondly, this particular doomsday is based on a completely false premise. The premise that carbon dioxide is bad. It didn't come here from Martians as some kind of poison for the Earth. It came from the fossil fuels, which were made by sunlight. All the fossil fuels are organic. They were made from plants. They were made with solar energy. They're not some horrible thing that Frankenstein has come up with. And we've been led to believe that fossil fuels are dirty. Now, what's wrong with dirt? That's what we grow our food in. They're going to think of these words, because what they mean is not dirt like in the dirt in the ground. They mean like in dirty, rotten scoundrel. They're using dirty as a swear word to say dirty fossil fuels, dirty coal, dirty oil, that. And so they're trying to give it a bad connotation. This is the essence of propaganda, is to associate normal words with with other bad words. Like
And we are seeing a lot of propaganda. Not to say that those arguments and those concerns absolutely have a place in discussion. Science, by the nature of science, needs to be poked, prodded, questioned. That's what science is. There isn't this misnomer of settled science. Science is never, ever settled. So I want to hear those arguments. I want to hear those concerns. Those very arguments and concerns are things that you founded Greenpeace on, to say we want something better for our planet. And I applaud that. But I think it was in your earlier book that you point out in Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, the byline is the making of a sensible environmentalist, is that you use sense. And part of that comes from the give and take, from listening to opposing point of views, looking at data and trying to come to a logical conclusion. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely, Michelle. The problem is that the environmental movement largely degenerated into using misinformation and fear and scare stories instead of using good science. It got basically hijacked by the political left while I was in it. That's why I had to leave in the end. I ended up being the only one of the international directors with any formal science education. I have a Bachelor of Science honors in biology and forestry and a PhD in ecology, and I've spent my whole life studying science, right from when I was 12, when my parents bought me the books of knowledge. So I just am so upset at the way this has gone, in that you start in an organization that has noble intentions. You're all volunteers trying to save the world from nuclear war or killing all the whales.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it becomes successful and kind of turns into a business. And pretty soon you got a big payroll to meet. And then the fundraising becomes more important than the campaign. And then they start inventing stuff. And before long, it turns into a racket peddling junk science and fear to the public to get the money from them.
Fear is a motivator. That's what gets the money. And we have to be honest, there are huge financial, political, and power interests that can come with these things, as you say, starting with good intentions. Now, I would not be a very good journalist, and there's not always a lot of good journalism anymore, if I didn't point out that Greenpeace put out a statement on you, Dr. Moore, saying that Patrick Moore has been a paid spokesman for a variety of polluting industries for more than 30 years, including timber, mining, chemical, and the like. I'm trying to do this from memory, not to insult my guest, but again, it is important to follow who's behind you. Where's the money come from, just as we do with Greenpeace. I think the difference is what you need to do, what any of us need to do while we ask those questions, and I will let you respond, is to also look at the facts, look at the data, do the research for yourself. What say you?
Well, to begin with, to Greenpeace, it seems that every industry is dirty and polluting. Right? I mean, they don't seem to know of an industry that isn't.
Well put. That's true.
And
okay.
What I like when they say chemicals and forestry and mining and everything, where we get everything from. They don't even like agriculture much, and that's a fairly important industry, and they just want to completely gut it so that it has no more fossil fuels to use to grow our food, harvest our food, and drive it into the cities where people need it. But the key thing here is that I have never been a lobbyist or a PR person. I am a scientist offering advice to industry on how to improve their environmental performance, and also without going bankrupt, because the demands that are made by much of the environmental movement would bankrupt nearly everybody. And that's what they're doing right now, actually. The administration that's come in the US, I'm a Canadian, and we have the same problem here. And in many of the Western European countries, it's the same too. The administrations that come in are about to gut the entire economy of its energy resources and many other very important things. Like they talk about single-use plastics, for example. For goodness sakes, in medicine and health, single-use plastics are one of the most important things. you've got blood bags, you've got intravenous tubing, you've got gloves, you've got hoods, you've got clothing, you've got all these things which are single-use plastics. You don't want to contaminate a piece of an instrument and get the next person sick from it. I mean, it's been a big advantage in health to have single-use plastic. The real problem is the recycling and disposal aspect. United States and Canada both put more than 50% of their municipal waste in landfills. We should be using the municipal waste that isn't suitable for reuse and recycling for energy. There's actually a few plants in the US, but Europe, they put all their waste that isn't suitable for recycling into producing electricity and heat. The whole of Western Europe gets 4% of its electricity from burning waste in clean burning plants, state-of-the-art plants. So many of these things could be resolved, but the real problem is the environmental movement is against fire. They are against burning fossil fuels, they are against burning wood, and they are against burning waste. They're against burning everything. Fire was the beginning of human civilization. It was like the most important thing. We ended up being able to smelt metals. We ended up being able to keep ourselves warm in colder climates. Fire is at the very basis of human civilization, and these people are against it. They're against burning. They're against burning anything to get energy, and this is stupid.
Extremism and intolerance are going hand in hand, and that's the danger. To have a very extreme point of view, I'm fine with that. Again, I relish in let's challenge. I don't care how ridiculous I think your claim is. Let's talk about it. Let's consider it. Let's see where that comes from. Because what if that mindset leads us to the discovery of something that is so beautifully biodegradable to replace those single-use plastics? That's great. In the meantime, we have what we have. We can appreciate what we have. We can try to be more environmentally responsible in what we have. I get all of that, but it's the intolerance that has taken the mindset of America, caused us to be afraid of these invisible monsters. And doctor, it seems as though we want to transfer all of the authority to technocrats, fallible men, instead of using direct observation to say, well, tell us what to do, save us.
Well, a good example, Michelle, biodegradable is sort of like almost a religious word.
It's
got to be good if it's biodegradable. Yeah, well, you don't want your house to be biodegradable. There's a lot of things that we would rather be the opposite of biodegradable.
This is true.
Durable, right? You want to clad your house in something that isn't going to rot off in the first month. And so biodegradable is good under certain circumstances. And all organic matter is biodegradable. But back to plastic, because it's been vilified to such an extent. Nature created plastic 3 billion years ago. Cellulose is a plastic. Cellulose is a polymer of glucose. Glucose being the sugar that plants make with photosynthesis that provides the energy for all of life. They make that sugar from carbon dioxide and water. It's amazingly simple formula, but it's an amazingly complex process using sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into the energy for all of life. So glucose joined in a string is cellulose. So cotton is plastic because cotton is a polymer of cellulose. It's made of cellulose. So there are many natural plastics. We just don't use that word for them. But most plastics are made from fossil fuels. In fact, the war on plastic is kind of a proxy for the war on fossil fuels. And the fossil fuels, as I say, were made from life. We're just taking living things that were converted deep in the ground into hydrocarbons from carbohydrates, which is what they were originally. They're turned into hydrocarbons, and now we can take individual monomers and join them together in polymers to make plastic, like polystyrene, polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride. Those are all synthetic plastics that we have made. Life has made them. We are life. We made them. And they say, oh, but it was industry. Well, okay, let's give that up. Let's just give up industry, whatever that word means in your mind. You know, obviously we're not going to give up industry. I'm talking to you on a computer from how many thousand miles away. We're not going to say, okay, we're going to give all the industry up. And so I think people have to get more specific in what they do and don't think is right, and be educated about why they do and don't think it's right. Because plastic is not the problem it's made out to be. You know the Pacific garbage patch that's twice the big of the size of Texas? It does not exist. My book proves that. It isn't there. They're lying about its existence. The reason you believe them is because you go on the internet and they show you these photoshopped images with a big blob painted on the earth saying, here's the Pacific garbage patch. But it isn't a photograph. The photograph of the Pacific Ocean from space shows nothing, shows the ocean, clear and simple, no garbage patch. Then they say, well, it's just below the surface. No, plastic doesn't work that way. It either floats or sinks, basically. And so they have made this up. And CNN said that it is now twice the size of Texas, 3 times the size of France, and growing more rapidly than we had ever imagined, right? So this is just like a total scare story about this massive blob that is growing in the Pacific, but nobody can see it because it's 1,000 miles from shore.
Wow. What a story when you think about that. Having come from the media, I have an understanding, and as you're watching or listening to the broadcast today, Dr. Moore, we would have talking points coming from Greenpeace or coming from the DNC, the RNC, or whoever they were. Back in the day, you would take those talking points and say, okay, let's investigate this news story. Let's see what it's about. Let's present both sides of the story. Let's see and report that way. Something took place in the last 20 years where we don't do that. If Greenpeace, for example, puts out a news story, if it comes across your desk, they'll have, and here's this, and you will see them just put that right into the news without any investigation. So it's not outside of the realm of possibility that one organization makes it up and boom.
It has become acceptable to lie in the media. And Sir David Attenborough, I mean, I know you're supposed to be all worshipy about him and everything. In my book, there's 3 lies about the walruses, about the albatross feeding their chicks plastic, mistaking it for food, which is a complete lie. The Smithsonian tells these same lies. Greenpeace tells them, and they get away with them as if they're God's word, you know, but they're not. They are lies. And so in my book, for example, the polar bears, everybody thinks the polar bears are going extinct because the ice is melting in the Arctic. The polar bears have gone from 1973, when all polar nations adopted a treaty, international treaty, ending the unrestricted hunting of polar bears. No one knows about that treaty. The media, the activists, the politicians never tell us about that treaty. That treaty was signed and ended the unrestricted hunting of polar bears. At that time, there was about 8,000 of them. Today, there's between 30 and 50,000 of them. Finally, the polar bear scientists who've been telling us they're going extinct have to admit that. So what do they say now? Oh, they'll be extinct by 2100, right? Their population may have grown, but the ice is going to melt really bad. It's going to melt really, really bad, and then the polar bears will die. Well, actually, that's not true. If you look at a satellite picture of the North Pole in the winter, It is completely covered in ice. The entire Arctic Ocean is covered in ice still. It's only in the summer that the ice is shrinking some. This is actually good, and maybe one of the reasons why the polar bear is recovering so quickly from overhunting is because now the sun can reach the surface of the ocean and promote the growth of plankton in the Arctic more than it could when the ice was
So
more
more
intense.
food, more
So more
resources.
food for the fish, more food for the seals, more food for the bears. That's how the ecosystem works, the food chain works. So people who are knowledgeable of this, like Susan Crockford here in close to me in Victoria, British Columbia, has been studying polar bears for, well, pretty well all her life. And she's the one who finally broke through and forced the scientists to admit that they just couldn't keep saying that the polar bear population was declining when in fact it was growing quite rapidly over
So
50
we
years.
have an ignorant population. We are afraid to challenge those ideas. And it's understandable to me because we all, thinking people, doctor, we care about the environment. We care about our home. We want to have things cleaner and better. We want to hold corporations accountable for dumping icky chemicals into the water. None of us really want that. And there's a place for that because we don't want industry to be unchecked. But conversely, we have environmentalists and the media and politicians who are now becoming unchecked. And that's equally as dangerous, wouldn't you say?
It is absolutely, and that's the direction things are going now. Now, take another issue, the coral reefs. Nearly everybody believes that the coral reefs are dying. And that's because in 2016, just a few years ago, a story came out from the Great Barrier Reef that 93% of the Great Barrier Reef was dying, about to die, nearly dead, terminal, every word but dead. See, that's how they couch it. When something is nearly dead, it's not dead. And in fact, the Great Barrier Reef is not dead. It is perfectly healthy. Great Barrier Reef always suffered damage, especially from cyclones, what they call hurricanes here. And so that happens. Reefs get damaged by hurricanes. But in general, the Great Barrier Reef is in fine condition. And the interesting thing is the most biodiversity of corals, the largest number of species of corals, are in the warmest seas in the world in Indonesia, the Coral Triangle, it's called. I've been there twice and going again because anybody who likes snorkeling and scuba diving should go to the Coral Triangle. It is the most beautiful underwater place on the planet. And it has 600 species of coral and 2,000 species of fish. And it's just unbelievable, the color and the movement, because there's soft corals in the Coral Triangle, and as opposed to most corals which are rigid with a hard shell. These are soft corals that sway in the currents and in the waves. It's most beautiful. There's 100 colors in front of you up there. But these are the warmest oceans in the world. The reason those corals are there is because they have shrunk from when the oceans were even warmer. This is kind of a sanctuary for corals. The warmest oceans in the world are a sanctuary, not a place where the corals are going to die from being too hot. Corals have a requirement for the warmest waters of any species in the oceans. And the truth is nearly all categories of marine species are most abundant in this area around Indonesia, Philippines, and Solomons, called the Coral Triangle. Just Google Coral Triangle and you'll see it's true. Even the Worldwide Fund for Nature recognizes this and at the same time says we mustn't let it get warmer, it'll kill all the corals. No, if it gets warmer, the corals will spread out into a larger range than they occupy now because this is a cold period in the history of the Earth right now.
Yeah.
And they've got it so backwards. Right now we're in the Pleistocene Ice Age. This is an interglacial period, but it's still really cold now compared to what it has been for the last 200 million years. And during that 200 million years, the Earth was green from pole to pole. Forests were growing on the Arctic islands of Canada, and even Antarctica had forests on it in those times. So, and CO2 is lower now than it has been in nearly the whole history of the world. So they've got it exactly opposite, and they're pushing this idea there's too much CO2 and the temperature is too high, when in fact the opposite is true. And anybody can verify that. It's even in Wikipedia. I mean, you don't have to go too far to look back at the history of the temperature and the CO2 on the Earth back millions of years to see that this is true. And they say, well, we weren't here then, so we couldn't tolerate that. No, our ancestors were here then. They came through all those periods of warmer climate and higher CO2. And in fact, most people don't think about it, but every single living thing on this earth today, every insect, every fish, every human, every living thing represents a successful continuous reproduction since the beginning of life.
Indeed.
Or we wouldn't be here.
And the beauty to me of that is the perfect environment that we are given on this planet, even with the ups, the downs. I'm all for responsible caretaking of this earth that we have been given. But that balance causes us to have to take responsibility, to think for ourselves. I wanted to ask you a question that is in line with your book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, that takes us off of the environmental issue and to the COVID issue, because to me, it's another invisible catastrophe. And I'll give you an example, just to see what people are thinking, get some opposing ideas, which you now in our 20 minutes of friendship, I welcome that. I love that. I posted a meme of a flagpole. It had a mask on it, and it said flag of slavery. Now, people came unglued. I tried to explain, there's more kinds of slavery than just people. Sometimes we're a slave to fear. Sometimes we're a slave to ideas. And I see that to a degree with this virus. It's another invisible thing. We have to trust the technocrats, those people who know better than us, despite evidence and investigation and statistics that might say that mask isn't really doing much, for example.
Yeah, the COVID, I try to avoid it, getting it for sure.
In more ways than one.
I've had my first vaccination, and I went on a trip to the US recently, and coming back to Canada, I had to be quarantined in a hotel for 3 days and then 14 days at home. And so I thought about it a lot and all that during the time. And I was tested 3 times negative during that time. So that was good to know.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is not unusual in the history of life for epidemics to occur in species. And especially to take out the weakest, which are often the oldest. And this is not unprecedented. It's, you look at it from a larger, from an overview, it's just an event, a fact. But at the personal level, it's very emotional because it's your mom or your dad or your cousin or your aunt, Yeah. And
it is real. It is real. Unlike
Yes.
some of the things that we have been talking about today, it is real. But I think the implications of control or fake science really do come into play, and that's to me is the more scary monster than these invisible things we've been talking about. It's the people who want to profit, get power, and are as infallible as you and I. And yet we treat them as these demigods.
But there's also the people who are saying that the vaccine is poison. And that's an awful side of it too. I mean, some people are emphasizing that the virus is the worst thing that's happened in the history of the world when it is not. And other people are going the other way and saying we shouldn't be taking this vaccine, and that would make even more people susceptible. So there's people on both sides that are using this as a way to scare people and control people. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to get away from that when something is invisible. But
No,
it's
but can
really
I tell you
important.
what I've learned from you, from your book? And this is one of the things that I've gleaned, other than the facts and the wow, I'm not hearing that, is that those arguments, they have a place in the discussion. They just don't have the right to overtake the discussion. I have as many concerns about the vaccine that's untested, but I'm not saying that it's the next great evil or the mark of the beast, right? It's just my choice, my body, or my concerns. That should be part of the discussion, not the shutdown. How dare you, have this opinion? That's what I've learned from you, and even from your stories, from all that you've gone through. You've been a great inspiration to a lot of us who dare to question the narrative that we're given. On behalf of all of us who follow you, thank you so much.
Well, there's a short ditty that goes, when I get new information, Joe, I change my mind. What do you do? Right? And lifelong learning, my mom told me that I should not think I could stop learning just because I became an adult. And you're no longer a child, so you don't have to go to school anymore, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
no, we should think of ourselves as being in school our whole lives. And we should always be looking for information that contradicts our held beliefs, and make sure we look at that. Every time we hear something that goes against what we think is true, we should examine it. Because the terrible thing about this climate issue is they say we are skeptics. They even call us deniers if we dare to question a single premise of theirs. And in fact, that is what science is about. The fundamental principle of science is to be skeptical, always be skeptical. That makes the best scientists. And in fact, if you look going back at Galileo, at Darwin, at Mendel, at Einstein, and all of the other great scientists, it was in most cases one person who made the breakthrough. Science is not done by consensus or committee. Science is done by individuals having a breakthrough in thinking. And we should always remember that and be grateful to these people who somehow had the minds that could come up with
And the
this
courage.
And the courage. Because Darwin, he died before the world recognized the truth of what he was saying about evolution. There was a lot of opposition to his ideas. And the same thing with
And as
Mendel.
there is today, and it's because, Darwinism is the going idea, but there are a lot of challenges in science, in biology, and the like. And to shut out those voices as just as ignorant. I have to applaud you. We're at the end of our time for your book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Now, as you're listening, as you're viewing, you can go to MyMichelleLive.com, and there is a link to Dr. Moore's books. So you can pick up his books, you can learn, find his website, and learn more about what he can teach us that maybe you're not hearing in the mainstream media from politicians and from those organizations that we've come to give a lot of money to. So think for yourself and be educated. Dr. Moore, it has been so much fun. I'm really glad to have met you for the first time, and I appreciate your time today.
That's wonderful, Michelle. I'd like to continue sometime again with you if we could. The audiobook just came out, which I'm really excited about. It's a very pleasant lady speaking my book, and I think it's great. And a lot of people like audiobooks for some reason.
Yeah.
I'm not the type of person that can do that. I need a real book.
Just to sit down and read it. Yeah, but they are great when you're driving, you're commuting. Sometimes when you're sitting at your desk working, audiobooks are great. So you can pick up that book on audio as well. Get the link at MyMichelleLive.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Moore.
Thanks, Michelle.
For more fun, go to MyMichelleLive.com.
Lovely. That's a wrap. Thank you so much.